Imagine facing the man who crushed your spirit at the most crucial night of your life, wearing the dress he once ruined. Ella Hart thought she was ready for this corporate gala, ready to reclaim her identity. But when her ex-husband, Sebastian Hale, sees her in her vintage gown, his mocking words cut deeper than any divorce decree. Just as Ella's world threatens to shatter again, a shadow falls. Daniel Cross, a legendary, formidable billionaire, steps in. He doesn't offer comfort, he offers a dance. Watch as a single waltz exposes years of betrayal, unearths hidden motives, and begins a dangerous game of power where the dress is the least of the stakes. Ella Hart stood before the full-length mirror in the cramped, borrowed dressing room, the scent of lavender and old paper clinging faintly to the velvet lining of the garment bag. Her reflection, encased in midnight blue satin, looked almost alien to her. It wasn't merely a dress, it was a relic, an artifact pulled from the deepest recesses of a forgotten life. This dress, she knew, was the sartorial equivalent of an open wound, carefully stitched, but prone to bleeding. The dress was vintage Chanel, a piece from the late 90s, meticulously tailored and utterly timeless. She had bought it 10 years ago, long before the name Sebastian Hale became synonymous with her own personal catastrophe. They had been engaged then, young, ambitious, and blinded by the intoxicating mix of shared dreams and a terrifying lack of capital. She had blown a significant portion of her first real commission, a landscape design project for a minor tech mogul, on this dress, intending to wear it for their first major social event as a couple. Sebastian had been furious. He hadn't understood the investment, the craftsmanship, or the emotional significance of owning something so beautiful and enduring. "It looks dated, Ella. Get something modern. Something that screams now, not then," he'd sneered, tossing it carelessly onto the floor. She had tucked it away, unworn, when the now that Sebastian craved, the relentless pursuit of wealth and corporate dominance, began to consume them both, eventually consuming their marriage entirely. Tonight, she was wearing it, not out of nostalgia, but defiance. The event was the annual Blackwood Industries Gala, a labyrinth of old money, cutthroat deals, and the very air Sebastian breathed. Blackwood Industries, the behemoth from which Sebastian had violently carved out his own successful, albeit smaller empire, was now the target of Ella's professional focus. After 4 grueling years post-divorce, she had rebuilt her life not just as a landscape architect, but as an expert consultant in sustainable, large-scale urban development. Her firm, Viridian, was a finalist for the massive Blackwood Tower renovation, a project that, if secured, would permanently free her from the financial shadow Sebastian had cast. The power imbalance between them had been the true poison. When they married, they pooled their meager savings, but Sebastian, with his magnetic, ruthless drive, had leveraged every penny, every contact, and every late-night conversation with Ella about design aesthetics and business strategy into the formation of Hale Dynamics. When the divorce papers were signed, he ensured she received a settlement that was generous enough to appear fair on paper, but paltry compared to the staggering value of the company she had helped him conceptualize. He hadn't just taken the company, he had weaponized their shared history to undermine her confidence and financial independence. Ella smoothed the skirt, the deep blue absorbing the weak light. Her heart was a frantic bird, caged behind her ribs. The psychological conflict was immediate and sharp. She needed to look powerful, successful, indifferent. Yet, donning the dress felt like inviting a memory to dance with her ghost. It was a risky psychological move, perhaps a form of self-sabotage, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed this particular armor tonight. A knock interrupted her introspection. It was Clara, her business partner, her voice muffled but sharp. 5 minutes, Ella. You look incredible. Now, put on your battle face. Remember, we are here for Blackwood, not for ancient history. Battle face engaged, Ella murmured, securing a simple silver locket, a gift from her grandmother, around her neck. The locket was the only heirloom she had refused to sell during the darkest days after the settlement. It felt cool and reassuring against her collarbone. As she stepped out of the room and headed towards the ballroom, the grandeur of the setting began to close in. The gala was held in the grand atrium of the old Blackwood building, a soaring space with marble floors and frescoed ceilings. Waiters drifted by with silver trays of champagne, their faces impassive masks of service. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, old leather, and the hushed, predatory murmur of high finance. Then she saw him, Sebastian Hale. He was standing near the central fountain, talking to a distinguished older man, likely a Blackwood board member. Sebastian had cultivated his image to a lethal perfection: tailored Italian suit, a smile that promised both partnership and immediate conquest, and eyes that constantly scanned the room for advantage. He was beautiful, in a chiseled, dangerous way, the kind of man who could break things just by looking at them the wrong way. He caught her eye across the room, and for a fleeting moment, his expression was genuinely unreadable. Recognition? Surprise? Then the familiar, condescending amusement settled over his features. He excused himself from the board member and began walking towards her, his stride purposeful and possessive, even now. Ella felt the old psychological chokehold tighten. She braced herself, straightening her spine, trying to remember that she was now Ella Hart, director of Viridian, not Ella Hale, the discarded accessory. She had to navigate this first, painful interaction with the dress as her only witness. The first twist of the night, the deliberate choice of her attire, was about to trigger the unavoidable confrontation. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of inevitable conflict. The relic dress was out of the bag, and the past was coming to collect its due. Sebastian Hale moved through the crowd like a predator among prey, his internal radar zeroing in on the incongruous sight of his ex-wife. He had expected her, of course. He knew her firm, Viridian, was foolishly vying for the Blackwood contract, a bid he intended to crush with minimal effort. But he hadn't expected her to look like this. He reached her side, his presence an immediate imposition, shutting out the surrounding din. His smile, though practiced, didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. Ella, I suppose congratulations are in order for managing to infiltrate the big leagues, though I must admit I expected a better effort. Ella met his gaze, refusing to flinch. The years of therapy and quiet success had gifted her a shield, thin but resilient. Sebastian, no infiltration required. Viridian earned the invitation. Unlike some people, my business is built on sustainable practices, not leveraged buyouts. He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that was instantly recognizable as his prelude to a psychological strike. Always the idealist, aren't you? Still tilting at windmills. His eyes slid down her dress, an almost microscopic appraisal that dragged along the satin's bias cut, tracing the subtle, elegant lines. When his gaze finally returned to her face, the amusement had curdled into a devastating, personal mockery. The dress, he drawled, his voice dropping just enough to make the insult an intimate secret between them. The infamous Chanel relic. I thought you'd gotten rid of that antique years ago. The one you bankrupted us for back when we thought a mortgage was a life goal." Ella felt the heat rise instantly to her cheeks, a searing betrayal of her attempt at composure. "It's timeless, Sebastian, unlike the trend-chasing nonsense you prefer." "Timeless?" he scoffed, leaning in slightly, his expensive cologne, a woody, sharp scent, overpowering the lavender of her dress. "Or simply dated and desperate. It's the wrong color, the wrong silhouette, and frankly, the wrong message. This gala is about power, cutting-edge vision, and looking like you belong in the future. You look like a museum piece, Ella. A dusty reminder of when you had poor taste, and even poorer judgment." The power imbalance was immediately re-established. His words were a scalpel, cutting away the carefully constructed facade of her success. The insult wasn't about fashion. It was about her worth, her choices, and the implication that she was still clinging to the sentimental failures of their shared past. It tapped directly into the core betrayal, that he had used her idealism as a stepping stone and then discarded her when she no longer served his ascent. A profound weariness washed over Ella. She knew she shouldn't engage, but the raw injustice of his contempt made her throat tighten. "I wore it because it's beautiful, Sebastian, and because it's a reminder of what I chose to value before your greed contaminated everything." His expression darkened, briefly revealing the cold, calculating ruthlessness beneath the polished exterior. "Greed? It's called ambition, Ella, and it's why I'm here discussing the future of Blackwood while you're standing on the periphery, wearing a garment that screams settlement check." He flicked an imaginary piece of lint from his lapel, signaling the conversation's end. "Do yourself a favor and hire a stylist. You're embarrassing yourself. And more importantly," he paused, letting the silence draw out, "you're embarrassing your bid." With a final, contemptuous smirk, Sebastian turned to walk away, fully convinced he had delivered the killing blow, successfully undermining her psychological footing before the night even began. Ella stood frozen, the noise of the gala crashing back in, feeling the eyes of peripheral observers who had clearly witnessed the charged exchange, prickling her skin. Her hands clenched, the silk of her dress wrinkling under the sudden, involuntary force. The injustice was so potent it tasted like bile. She had come here to be strong, and within 5 minutes he had reduced her to the discarded ex-wife, clinging to a symbol of their failed idealism. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the marble floor. Just as the overwhelming sense of defeat began to settle, a curious shift occurred in the atmosphere. The predatory hum of the room seemed to pause, or perhaps the predators themselves had simply turned their attention elsewhere. Ella looked up, instinctively following the shift in the energy. A man had entered the grand atrium. Not merely entered, he had arrived. He was taller than Sebastian, with a more imposing, effortless presence. His suit, while perfectly tailored, lacked the ostentatious flash of Sebastian's attire. It was charcoal, cut with a quiet severity that commanded respect, not demanded attention. His hair was silver at the temples, contrasting with sharp, intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in the entire room, yet focused on nothing in particular. This was not the look of an aspirant, but of someone who already owned the field. A ripple of hushed whispers followed his entrance. Ella caught snippets. "Cross. Daniel Cross is actually here. I thought he never attended these things." Daniel Cross. The name was synonymous with global finance, reclusive power, and a reputation for being utterly unpredictable. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a financial legend, rumored to have built his empire by anticipating and causing market shifts others couldn't even detect. He moved slowly, a gravitational force, until he was suddenly standing where Sebastian had stood only moments ago. He had evidently witnessed the tail end of the interaction. His gaze, intensely dark and surprisingly gentle, settled upon Ella. He didn't offer a pitying smile or a professional nod. He simply looked at her, truly looked at the dress, and then back at her eyes. Sebastian, who had taken 3 steps away, paused, instinctively sensing the new power dynamic. He turned back, his practiced smirk replaced by a look of wary deference. Even Sebastian Hale was nervous around Daniel Cross. The legendary billionaire extended a hand toward Ella, his gesture graceful and utterly unexpected. His voice, a low baritone, cut through the noise, clear and deliberate. "Excuse me," Daniel Cross said, his eyes never leaving Ella's. "I find myself in need of a dance partner for the first waltz." "And that, Mrs. Hart," he paused, deliberately emphasizing the correct formality as Sebastian watched, "is the single most magnificent, perfectly chosen dress in this entire room. It doesn't scream now, it screams forever. May I have the honor?" The psychological impact was instantaneous. The mocking words Sebastian had just delivered evaporated in the face of this absolute public validation from the highest possible authority in the room. Sebastian stood frozen, his insult not only nullified but violently reversed, his power play rendered utterly moot. Ella's hand trembled slightly as she finally reached for the hand of the billionaire, stepping from the shadow of her ex-husband into the blazing, uncertain spotlight of Daniel Cross's intervention. Chapter 3. Daniel Cross and the Unexpected Intervention. The silence that followed Daniel Cross's invitation was not the absence of noise, but the collective, terrified holding of breath by the entire room. Sebastian Hale's jaw tightened, the blood draining from his face in a visible display of shock and sudden, dangerous confusion. This was not merely an interruption. It was a hostile takeover of his carefully orchestrated humiliation. Ella, however, felt a strange, cold clarity descending. Her initial instinct was to refuse, to flee the overwhelming pressure of Daniel Cross's intense gaze and the spotlight he had just cast upon her. But then she glanced at Sebastian, at the sheer, agonizing betrayal etched onto his features, and the urge to flee was replaced by a surge of defiant strength. "The honor is mine, Mr. Cross," Ella replied, her voice steady, pulling from a reservoir of composure she hadn't realized she still possessed. She placed her trembling hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, and unexpectedly reassuring. As Daniel gently led her onto the recently cleared space on the marble floor, reserved for the official start of the dancing, the string quartet began the opening notes of a classical waltz. The entire event seemed to pivot on their single, unexpected movement. Sebastian watched, rooted to the spot, the moral complexity of the moment hitting him hard. He wasn't just losing face. He was watching a legend invalidate his entire narrative about Ella. His mocking of her dated dress was now a public display of his own lack of taste and shallow judgment, exposed by a man whose opinion truly mattered. He could feel the eyes of the Blackwood board members on him, the subtle shift in their posture from deferential to questioning. His hidden motives to undermine Ella's bid and reaffirm his dominance had spectacularly backfired. On the dance floor, Daniel's movements were precise, confident, and surprisingly gentle. He was an excellent dancer, guiding her with minimal pressure. They were close enough to speak without being overheard by the gaping crowd. "You look like you're contemplating homicide, Mrs. Hart," Daniel murmured, a slight, knowing smile touching the corner of his lips. Ella managed a wry half-smile. Just debating the logistics, Mr. Cross. It's the rage to redemption arc I've been living for the past 4 years. An excellent arc, if I may say so, but poor execution, leaving witnesses and evidence. He spun her in a flawless turn, his eyes conveying a deep, unsettling understanding. Your ex-husband, Sebastian, is it? He seemed determined to ensure you didn't enjoy the evening. I apologize for the necessary spectacle, but I abhor small-minded cruelty. Necessary spectacle, Ella questioned, her psychological guard fully up now. The gratitude for his intervention was warring with a suspicion of his hidden motives. Daniel Cross did nothing without reason. Why intervene? You don't know me. True, he conceded easily, but I know a diamond when it's being trampled by a common boot. And I recognize the dress. Ella's breath hitched. You recognize it? Yes, a 1996 FW Chanel, designed by Carl for the Urban Nocturne collection. Only a few were made in this specific shade of Prussian blue. It was a commentary on enduring elegance amidst transient trends, an expensive choice for a younger woman, even then. I remember seeing photos of it in Vogue. His detailed knowledge was astonishing. Sebastian had called it dated. Daniel Cross called it urban nocturne. The contrast was a sledgehammer to Sebastian's credibility. You have an impressive memory for fashion history, Ella managed, trying to process the subtle power move he was making. I have a memory for value, Mrs. Hart. Whether it's a struggling company, an undervalued piece of real estate, or a dress that holds a story. That dress is a statement of resilience, of refusing to chase the flavor of the month. Your ex-husband dismissed it because he only understands the fleeting value of the moment, the kind of value that evaporates with the first market correction. Ella realized his intervention was deeply strategic, designed not just to save her from humiliation, but to send a message to everyone, especially Sebastian. He was defining the playing field. He respected the enduring. Sebastian respected the ephemeral. She risked a bold question. And what value do you see in me, Mr. Cross? I am here to secure a contract that Sebastian intends to crush. Are you merely an admirer of my fashion, or is there a motive behind this generous defense? Daniel Cross paused mid-step, his gaze momentarily fixed over her shoulder, a shadow of cold calculation crossing his face before it softened slightly. A fair question. Let's just say, my involvement with Blackwood is far more substantial than anyone suspects, and I am currently assessing all the players involved in the upcoming renovation, including the ones that possess the rare combination of architectural vision and excellent taste. He didn't confirm his motive, but he confirmed a hidden agenda involving Blackwood. He was watching Sebastian, and he was interested in Ella's bid. The psychological conflict within Ella intensified. Was this a genuine appreciation, or was she merely a pawn in a far larger, more dangerous game involving Daniel and Blackwood? She couldn't tell. Daniel Cross was a closed book, his moral compass as difficult to discern as his ultimate wealth. If you are assessing the players, then you already know Sebastian Hale is highly competitive, Ella stated, testing him. Competitive or predictable? Daniel countered smoothly, guiding her into a tight spiral. He has an Achilles heel, Mrs. Hart, a profound, almost debilitating need for control and validation. It's why he couldn't stand the dress. It was something he couldn't control, couldn't value, and therefore had to belittle. The dance ended, the music fading into a polite but electric applause. Daniel Cross held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Don't let his noise distract you from your objective, Ella, he said, using her first name now, a subtle, proprietary shift. Your future is not defined by his judgment. It is defined by your next move. He gave a slight, formal bow, releasing her hand, but not her attention. As Daniel Cross melted back into the periphery, leaving a vortex of speculation in his wake, Ella looked across the room. Sebastian was gone. He hadn't stayed to face the fallout. The insult had been returned tenfold, and the sheer power of Daniel's intervention had forced him into a tactical retreat. Ella was left standing alone, validated, exposed, and now thoroughly entangled in a situation far more complex than a simple corporate gala. The path to redemption and financial freedom now ran dangerously close to the ambition and hidden motives of Daniel Cross. Ella retreated to the balcony overlooking the city skyline, the chill night air a welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom's attention. The echoes of the waltz still resonated in her senses, the unexpected warmth of Daniel Cross's hand, the quiet power of his presence, and the sheer audacity of his compliment. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to anchor herself back into the professional reality of the night. Sebastian's mocking words had been rooted in their shared, toxic history, but Daniel's validation had touched upon something deeper, a hidden motive that went beyond simple flirtation or chivalry. His knowledge of the dress, the Urban Nocturne collection, suggested a level of connoisseurship that was both fascinating and unsettling. It felt like he wasn't just reading the garment, he was reading her, or at least a version of her he found useful. The psychological conflict was now twofold, battling the ghosts Sebastian had summoned and trying to decipher the intention of her mysterious benefactor. Was Daniel Cross setting her up? Was he merely using her public humiliation to gauge Sebastian's temperament? The betrayal of her marriage was built on a series of small, insidious acts. Sebastian had always positioned himself as the visionary, the risk-taker, while subtly diminishing Ella's creative contributions. He'd taken her initial designs for sustainable community parks, rebranded the philosophy as Hale's integrated green model, and used it to secure their early, foundational funding. The night she'd excitedly shown him the concept sketches for a truly self-sustaining tower, a vision strikingly similar to the current Blackwood renovation, he'd looked at her with pity. "Sweetheart, that's utopian nonsense, good for a blog post, not for a balance sheet." He had later, during the divorce proceedings, tried to claim her design work was hobbyist and therefore not a marital asset, effectively stealing her intellectual property and the foundation of his own company's success. This was the core betrayal she was seeking redemption for tonight. A quiet voice broke into her thoughts. "It's a beautiful view, but you look like you're plotting a hostile takeover of the entire city." It was Clara, her partner, looking less anxious and more intrigued than Ella had anticipated. "I might be," Ella admitted, turning. Daniel Cross just pulled the ultimate power move on Sebastian. Clara leaned on the marble railing. "Trust me, the entire room is still vibrating." Sebastian left shortly after. A public execution by one of the world's most powerful men. His ego won't recover for a week. She paused, her gaze shrewd. "But why? What does Cross want? He doesn't just spontaneously rescue damsels. He buys the castle and demolishes the dam." He mentioned Blackwood. He said his involvement is substantial, and he's assessing the players, including Viridian, Ella explained, feeling the need to articulate the risk. "He recognized the dress, Clara. He called it Urban Nocturne and cited the collection." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Now that's a hidden motive. That's specific. Daniel Cross is known for his eccentricities, but primarily for his ruthlessness in business. Maybe he has a fetish for vintage fashion, or maybe he sees you as an untapped asset he can deploy against Sebastian. Or maybe Sebastian is somehow in his way." Ella mused. Sebastian is too small for Daniel to worry about unless he's tied into something bigger. The thought struck her with a cold certainty. Sebastian's entire career was built on aggressive expansion and high-risk leveraging. If Blackwood was Daniel Cross's target, a known, stable behemoth, then Sebastian's recent, overly ambitious project in the next block could be a vulnerability Daniel intended to exploit. The next day, Ella found herself researching Daniel Cross's background with a feverish intensity. The information was scarce, shielded by a formidable wall of NDAs and corporate complexity. What little she found painted a picture of a morally complex character. He was known for buying struggling, often ethically compromised companies, dismantling them, and selling the parts at astronomical profit, claiming he was simply clearing the market of inefficiency. His philanthropy was vast, yet anonymous. He was a paradox, a ruthless capitalist with the sensibility of an art collector. She uncovered a small detail, a historical footnote in a decades-old financial journal. Daniel Cross's father had been ruined, not financially, but morally, in a corporate espionage scandal engineered by Blackwood Industries in the 1980s. The details were murky, but the implication was clear. Cross had a score to settle, and Blackwood was his target. This wasn't just a renovation project. It was a complex act of corporate vengeance. And if he was looking for players to assess, perhaps he saw, in Ella Hart, the discarded idealist, a weapon against the very people who embodied the corporate betrayal he despised. The thought made her stomach churn. Her redemption, her bid for independence, might be predicated on aligning herself with a man who was arguably as morally ambiguous as her ex-husband, simply operating on a grander scale. Later that evening, an unmarked envelope was delivered to Viridian's office. Inside was a single, elegantly debossed card. It wasn't an official invitation, but a private, handwritten note. Dinner tomorrow. No business talk, just good wine and interesting choices. DC, beneath the initials, a small, hand-drawn sketch, a delicate stylized rendering of the urban nocturne dress. Ella stared at the note, the fine vellum cool beneath her fingers. Daniel Cross had seen her vulnerability, validated her history, and now he was offering an entirely different kind of power. Sebastian's betrayal had taught her to be wary, to look for the hidden motives behind every grand gesture. But Daniel's intervention had also reignited a spark of self-worth that Sebastian had spent years trying to extinguish. She had a choice now: remain safely on the periphery, risking Sebastian's continued interference, or step into Daniel Cross's dangerous, powerful game. The path to true redemption, she realized, often required navigating morally gray territory. She knew what she had to do. The dinner was not a date. It was the first necessary step toward reclaiming her agency. The memory of the betrayal was not a single, shattering moment, but a long, slow erosion, like water carving a canyon. The central point of psychological conflict for Ella was accepting that the man she loved and trusted, Sebastian, was capable of such meticulous, sustained duplicity. Their marriage had been a partnership of opposites. Ella, the artist, saw solutions in sustainability and beauty. Sebastian, the financier, saw solutions in maximum return and leverage. She had believed their differences were complementary. Sebastian had seen her idealism as a resource to be mined. The deepest betrayal occurred in the year leading up to the divorce. Sebastian, using his charm and her trusting nature, had convinced her to sign an internal corporate document, a complex restructuring agreement for Hale Dynamics that effectively reclassified her intellectual property, her concept designs, and her personal investments in the company as loans repaid in full. He framed it as a necessary evil for securing a crucial round of venture capital, claiming the investors were wary of soft assets like design concepts being heavily weighted on the books. "It's just paperwork, Ella," he'd said, leaning over her at their kitchen table, his hand warm and persuasive on her shoulder. "As soon as the funding clears, we'll reverse it. But if we want to hit the big leagues, we have to look entirely finance-driven. Trust me." She had trusted him. She had signed the papers, unknowingly signing away her right to an equitable share of the company she had helped build from a sketch on a napkin to a multi-million-dollar entity. When the divorce came, triggered not by a single affair, but by the vast, unbridgeable chasm of his ambition and emotional distance, the settlement offer was a legal masterpiece of calculated meanness. The documents she had signed ensured she walked away with a modest lump sum, the repaid loans, but zero equity, zero claim to the company's appreciating value, and a non-disclosure agreement that muzzled her from ever discussing the true origins of Hale Dynamics' signature green model. The power imbalance was absolute. Sebastian retained everything: the company, the narrative, and the wealth. Ella was left with financial instability, professional muzzling, and the crushing realization that her love had been a financial liability to him, easily amortized and dismissed. The psychological aftermath was severe. She questioned her judgment, her intellect, and her ability to discern sincerity from manipulation. She remembered the day she retrieved the Urban Nocturne dress from the dry cleaners, years after it had been exiled to the back of the closet. The sight of it brought an unexpected, fierce anger, replacing the old shame. The dress wasn't just beautiful. It represented her core values: quality, enduring design, and defiance of fleeting trends, all the things Sebastian had mocked and discarded. Now, sitting in a quiet Italian restaurant, across a table from Daniel Cross, the betrayal felt distant but still palpable, a permanent scar. Daniel, true to his word, avoided business. They spoke of art, architecture, and the nature of true luxury. He listened with an intensity that Sebastian had never possessed, not just to her words, but to the ideas behind them. "You speak of design as a moral obligation," Daniel noted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass of expensive scotch. "Sebastian Hale sees it as a marketing opportunity." Ella winced slightly at the casual mention of her ex-husband's name. "He taught me that idealism is a costly weakness in his world. Only if you lack the backbone to attach a price to it," Daniel countered, his eyes sharp. "Your weakness, Ella, was not idealism, it was misplaced trust, a common error. But now you know the currency of ambition, and you understand the cost of betrayal. That is a powerful education. And you, Mr. Cross? What have you learned about the currency of ambition?" she asked, challenging him gently. Daniel smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his stern face. That it's rarely satisfied, and that the most effective way to dismantle an empire is not through a direct siege, but by exposing the rotten foundation it was built upon. Every empire has a weakness. Often, it's a moral compromise made in the pursuit of its power. His words struck a chord, aligning perfectly with her own quiet goal. She wanted to win the Blackwood contract on merit, but deep down, she also wanted to see Sebastian's foundation, the one built on her betrayal, exposed. "Why are you helping me, Daniel?" she finally asked, abandoning the formality. "The attention you gave me at the gala, it was calculated. What's your angle?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, confirming his hidden motives. "My angle is simple. Blackwood Industries played a deeply corrupt and destructive role in my family's history decades ago. My objective is to acquire the company and dismantle it, not for profit, but for correction. Sebastian Hale is an obstacle. He is too aggressive, too close to certain board members, and frankly, he represents everything I intend to purge. And you think Viridian, a small firm, can be part of that? Ella asked, skeptical. I think you, Ella, are underestimated, and your design for the renovation is brilliant, sustainable, and real. It's everything Blackwood should be, and everything Sebastian cannot produce. If you win the bid, you gain access, credibility, and the leverage to truly reshape Blackwood's future. I provide the necessary shield and the strategic counsel. You provide the vision. It is a mutually beneficial alliance built on a shared interest, seeing the old guard fall. His proposal was a seductive mix of vengeance and redemption. It offered a path to professional triumph and financial freedom that was exponentially faster than the solitary path she had been on. But it required aligning with a morally complex character whose ultimate goal, corporate destruction, however justified, was unnerving. I need to know I'm not trading one manipulator for another, Ella stated, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. Daniel's expression remained steady. I won't lie, I am a formidable chess player, but I am offering you an equal partnership and the power to achieve your professional goals, free from Sebastian's shadow. My ambition is to correct a historical wrong. Your ambition is to correct a personal one. We are aligned, Ella, and unlike Sebastian, I would never mistake your idealism for weakness. The challenge was laid out. Accepting meant embracing a dangerous, high-stakes game. Refusing meant almost certain defeat at the hands of Sebastian's unrelenting ambition. Ella felt the slow emotional shift occur, the fear giving way to a resolute purpose. She reached across the table and shook Daniel Cross's hand, solidifying the morally complex alliance. The path to her redemption was now entwined with the hidden motive of a billionaire who saw her as his most powerful piece on the board. Sebastian Hale's retreat from the Blackwood Gala was not a simple exit. It was a psychological collapse disguised as a strategic withdrawal. The intervention by Daniel Cross had been a catastrophic public emasculation, broadcast to every power broker in the room. He hadn't just mocked Ella's dress, he had publicly ridiculed something that Daniel Cross had declared magnificent, a profound miscalculation of taste and power that undermined Sebastian's carefully curated image of infallibility. Back in the sterile, high-tech solitude of his penthouse office, Sebastian paced like a caged beast. His motive was always greed, cloaked in the acceptable language of vision and growth. But his greed wasn't just for money, it was for the feeling of winning, of being the ultimate alpha, the one whose judgment was unquestioned. Ella's presence, wearing that damn dress, had been an infuriating challenge to his control. He had intended to crush her spirit and her bid in one fell swoop. The core of his psychological conflict lay in his inability to reconcile Ella's quiet resilience with his need to control her narrative. He had always dismissed her as sentimental and naive, the soft half of their partnership. The fact that she was not only surviving, but thriving, and now being openly championed by Daniel Cross, sent tremors through his carefully constructed reality. Cross, he muttered the name, tasting bile. Daniel Cross was a ghost story, a financial demigod whose involvement signaled immediate danger. Why would he bother with Ella Hart? Sebastian knew the answer instinctively. It wasn't about Ella. She was merely the spearhead. Cross was coming for him. He slammed his hand onto his mahogany desk. His ambition was now consuming him, morphing into desperation. His company, Hale Dynamics, was built on a dangerously thin margin. His latest mega-project, the Citadel, required him to secure the Blackwood renovation to stabilize his cash flow and cement his reputation as the heir apparent to the city's development scene. If he lost the Blackwood bid, especially to Ella, the Citadel would wobble, and the vultures would descend. Sebastian's betrayal of Ella hadn't just been about the equity, it had been a preemptive strike, born of insecurity. He knew deep down that Ella's ideas were the true gold, the sustainable, forward-thinking concepts that investors were beginning to crave. By legally stripping her of credit, he had secured the intellectual capital and simultaneously crippled her ability to compete directly. Her quiet assent meant his betrayal was not just exposed, but now actively being weaponized against him. He called his chief financial officer, demanding an immediate, comprehensive review of Daniel Cross's recent market activities. I want to know where he's hitting, where he's vulnerable, and if he's acquired any short positions on my bonds. Everything. The ensuing days became a blur of paranoia and ruthless counter-strategy. Sebastian instructed his legal team to find any possible loophole, any professional misstep in Viridian's public record. He contacted his old contacts on the Blackwood board, subtly poisoning the well against Ella, leaking whispers about her sentimental approach and lack of hard-nosed corporate experience. "She's too soft for this project," he insisted to a skeptical board member over a private lunch. "Her concepts are pretty, but they lack the necessary financial aggression. She'll run over budget and derail the entire timeline. She's the artistic type. You need a general." The irony was heavy. Sebastian was criticizing the core values he had stolen and rebranded as his own integrated green model. The pressure intensified when the CFO reported back. Daniel Cross had not made any obvious hostile moves. His financial fingerprints were subtle, alluding to a quiet consolidation of high-yield Blackwood debt and minor, seemingly unrelated acquisitions of key surrounding parcels of real estate. Nothing directly pointing at Hale Dynamics, but everything pointing to a deep, calculated encirclement. Sebastian's desperation escalated. He realized he needed an immediate, overwhelming victory, a display of brute force to restore the lost perception of power. He decided to leverage his connections to force an early, closed-door presentation for the Blackwood board, hoping to rush the decision before Daniel Cross could fully deploy his influence, or Ella could gain further traction. He spent 48 hours straight, meticulously crafting a presentation that was pure swagger and unsustainable brilliance. Leveraging complex financial models, glossy renderings of hyper-modern design, and promising absurdly aggressive completion deadlines. It was a performance designed to appeal directly to the board's short-term financial appetite, ignoring the long-term, sustainable vision Ella championed. As he rehearsed his lines, the psychological toll began to manifest physically. He hadn't slept, his eyes were bloodshot, and he found himself snapping violently at his staff. He was spiraling, driven by the fear of losing the control he had fought so ruthlessly to secure. He caught his reflection in the mirrored wall of his office, a man in a suit, worth more than most homes, yet his face was pinched with anxiety. He was no longer just ambitious, he was enslaved by his own greed and the terrifying prospect of exposure. The mockery he had directed at Ella's dress now felt like a curse, a prophecy of his own looming obsolescence. The morning of the unscheduled board presentation, Sebastian stood ready to deliver his knockout blow. He walked into the Blackwood headquarters, radiating manufactured confidence. He was greeted, however, not by the deferential smiles he expected, but by a chilling, polite silence. Waiting in the boardroom, not as an invited guest, but sitting calmly at the head of the long mahogany table, was Daniel Cross. "Sebastian," Daniel greeted him, rising only slightly, his voice conveying a chilling lack of surprise. "I understand you've called an unscheduled meeting. A predictable move. I'm afraid the board will not be joining us yet. I requested a moment to speak with the general before the battle begins." Sebastian stared, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking. Daniel Cross was not merely an investor, he was somehow already in command of the arena. The reality hit him with the force of a physical blow. Daniel Cross had anticipated his every move, and the game had just been drastically altered. His descent into paranoia and desperation had led him straight into Daniel's meticulously prepared trap. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with unspoken tension, the air crackling with the electric potential of two opposing forces. Daniel Cross was a still, quiet point of immense power. Sebastian Hale was a whirlwind of frustrated, cornered aggression. Daniel let the silence stretch, observing Sebastian's escalating discomfort. "I intercepted your meeting, Sebastian, because I respect efficiency. Let's not waste the board's time with a presentation built on smoke and mirrors, especially since the mirrors reflect a very precarious financial reality." Sebastian forced a contemptuous laugh. "You've been spying on my bonds, Cross, lowballing my credit lines. Very subtle, but my company is sound. The Citadel is the future. Your scare tactics won't work." "I don't use tactics, Sebastian. I use facts," Daniel corrected, pulling a slim tablet towards him. "And the fact is, the foundation of the Citadel is reliant on you securing this Blackwood contract, which would act as collateral for your next round of high-interest debt acquisition. Lose Blackwood, and the Citadel crumbles. A classic house of cards. Very ambitious, but terribly fragile." The psychological war was fully engaged. Sebastian realized that Daniel Cross hadn't just studied his business, he had dissected his motive, the greed that drove him to overextend, and the arrogance that blinded him to his own risk. Meanwhile, Ella and Clara were setting up their own presentation in a nearby staging room. Ella was running on pure adrenaline and purpose, her focus absolute. She and Daniel had met twice more since the dinner. Their alliance was strictly professional, forged in the crucible of shared ambition and mutual distrust of Sebastian. Daniel had provided Ella with access to previously unavailable data about Blackwood's internal structural issues that would make Sebastian's hyper-modern, aggressive design structurally unfeasible and financially ruinous in the long term. This was the key to Viridian's success. They were the only firm addressing the true, hidden problems of the existing building, while Sebastian was simply painting over them. Ella knew that Daniel's assistance was not altruistic. He wanted her to win, because her proposed sustainable renovation was the perfect, legitimate reason to acquire and then fundamentally restructure Blackwood. He was using her high moral ground as cover for his corporate vengeance against the institution that had wronged his family. This was the essence of their morally complex alliance. She was accepting aid from a predator to defeat a betrayer. "Are you okay with this, Ella?" Clara had asked her the night before, her voice laced with concern. "Daniel Cross is playing a long game. Are you sure you're not trading Sebastian's small betrayal for Daniel's massive control?" "Sebastian's betrayal was personal and designed to destroy me," Ella had replied firmly. "Daniel's motive is corporate vengeance. He wants Blackwood's collapse, not mine. He needs my vision to legitimize his takeover. That means he needs me to be strong, not controllable. I know his weakness, Clara, his need for strategic elegance. I give him that, and he gives me the freedom to build." The psychological conflict had resolved into a clear-eyed calculation. She would leverage Daniel's power without succumbing to his control. Her redemption lay not in a simple victory, but in maintaining her integrity while navigating the morally gray area he inhabited. Back in the boardroom, Daniel was concluding his pre-meeting with Sebastian. "So, Sebastian, here's the offer," Daniel said, leaning back. "You withdraw your bid for the Blackwood renovation immediately. You concede the professional field to Viridian. In return, I will use my considerable resources to ensure your credit lines are stabilized just enough to keep the Citadel from collapsing immediately. A brief stay of execution. You save your reputation, and you walk away with the possibility of redemption, should you ever learn the difference between success and integrity." Sebastian, pale and breathing heavily, felt the crushing weight of the power imbalance. He was being offered a lifeline disguised as a surrender. He saw the cold, efficient ruthlessness in Daniel's eyes, the lack of malice, just a surgical removal of an impediment. "Why go to all this trouble, Cross? Why not just crush me?" Sebastian demanded, his voice hoarse. "Crushing you is predictable," Daniel stated, "and frankly, boring. My agenda is larger than you, Sebastian, but more importantly, I witnessed you mock a remarkable woman for her excellent taste. That shows a profound failure of character. I prefer to let a character flaw be its own undoing. Withdraw, or I will ensure that the first question the board asks you is about the specific terms of your divorce settlement with Mrs. Hart and the origins of your green model." That was the ultimate threat, exposing the foundational betrayal. Sebastian knew he couldn't survive that public scrutiny. His narrative would be destroyed. His greed had led him to this precipice. "You're a sociopath, Cross," Sebastian spat out. "Perhaps, but I'm an honest one," Daniel replied, shrugging, "and I'm on the side of enduring value. Now make your choice. Ella Hart and the Blackwood board are waiting." Sebastian stood rigid for a long moment, the choice between humiliation and total ruin hanging heavy in the air. His pride screamed for defiance, but his survival instinct, honed by years of cutthroat ambition, recognized the superior force. Finally he spoke, the word almost a whisper of defeat. "I withdraw." Daniel nodded, a gesture of chilling finality.